Yada yada hi dharmasya klanirбhavati bharata abhyutanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chidushkritam dharma samstapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. When goodness grows weak, when evil increases, I make myself a body. In every age I come back to deliver the holy, to destroy the sin of the sinner, to establish righteousness. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. Well, good morning and Merry Christmas, everybody. Really, seriously, Merry Christmas. It's a blessed time of the year. No matter what you think, it still is a blessed, we have viable complaints, but it's still a blessed time of the year. It's the time of hope. It's a time of joy. It's that we celebrate the infinite, all-pervading divinity coming down to the earth and taking the form of this tender little tiny baby, helpless, sweet, and who has infinite power and will come and will bring light and life and new hope to the world. It's a joyous time of the year. So this is why the Incarnation is full of grace and truth. In every year at New Year's, at Christmas Eve, we have this, sing-along Christmas carols. This year's a little different. And we have readings from the Gospel. And the program begins with the reading from the first verse of John 1. It's like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, full of grace and truth. That is the real meaning of Christmas. That is what Christmas is all about, that the Incarnation takes flesh and dwells among us, full of grace and truth. It's not about the Christmas presents. It's not about those god-awful jingles or the constant, hammering on us to buy, consume. It's about the Incarnation coming down to earth out of infinite compassion and dwelling among us as a human being. This ultimate reality, this full and perfect Brahman, just taking on our pains, our cares, our sorrows, and lifting up the world, just lifting everybody up by their advent in the world. The Incarnation actually just changes the pattern of everything. They model for us how we should live in the world. They raise the bar so that we all know that these are the standards by which a noble human being should live. This is how they reset that pattern. Earlier this month, I was on a panel, and a panel discussion on the significance of Sri Ramakrishna for Hindu-Christian studies. And on this panel, I spoke on how does an avatar behave toward women. Interesting subject, and I compared Ramakrishna and Jesus. Hadn't been done before that I know, and it was really interesting to me because I remembered these biblical stories from childhood, but I didn't know the context and I really didn't understand the meaning. So the study that I did was I found very inspirational and really very interesting. And I was able to share information on Sri Ramakrishna and women that none of them knew. So that was really good. And I thought, well, if I find it interesting and helpful, maybe you all will too. I hope so. So we don't often hear about incarnations and women, but it's really an important topic, and it's really very moving what we discover when we think about this, when we learn from it. Most of us have really no idea how women were regarded at the time of Jesus. We assume that's like, oh, well, they just rode donkeys, but apart from that, they were just like us. No, not at all. Women were not allowed to participate in the synagogue. They were not allowed to be they were allowed to view. They were not allowed to participate in the worship. They were not allowed to touch the holy book because if they did, it would defile the holy book. Men were not to speak to women, never, ever publicly, and not even if they were married to her. They were to speak as little as possible to women. That was, and if you did speak to a woman publicly, it was truly shocking. It was breaking the rules that everybody knew you had to observe. But Jesus treated men and women exactly the same way. Jesus saw men and women equally, and he saw that divinity shining within their hearts, and he saw that intrinsic nobility of human nature in every person that he encountered, whether they were male or female. He often spoke publicly to women, and it was truly shocking for everybody. He did it often and openly, no matter what the consequences were, and they weren't good. But he didn't do it just to be a rebel. He did it because his actions had to be truthful. If he believed something, he had to follow through in his actions. They were just spontaneous. So John tells us in the Gospel of John that the fact that Jesus spoke to a Samaritan woman at the well. Not only is he talking to a woman, bad, he's talking to a Samaritan woman, double bad, really bad. Because, and the gospel tells us that when he spoke to a woman publicly, the disciples were astonished. And when I read that, when I heard it as a kid, it was like, really? You're astonished he's speaking to a Samaritan woman? Because like Galilee, Samaria, it's all the same. You don't really get it. But the Samaritans were traditionally despised by Jews, and their worlds were entirely separate. They had no interaction with each other whatsoever. So for Jesus to talk publicly to a woman was like, to talk to a Samaritan woman was unthinkable. Unthinkable. So John records that the disciples are astonished. It's like, okay. What's interesting is this long conversation that he has with a Samaritan woman. It's the longest recorded conversation in the Gospel of John with a Samaritan woman. Not with the disciples, not with, the Pharisees or the Sadducees or all the, it's with a Samaritan woman. So the story is that Jesus and the disciples are on their way to Galilee. And on the way to Galilee, they have to go through Samaria. And it's been a very long walk. And Jesus is tired. And so he sits down by the well. The disciples go off to get food. So Jesus is sitting by the well, and this Samaritan woman comes down to draw water from the well. And Jesus turns to her and he said, "Will you give me a drink?" And the woman says, "You are a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan woman. How can I give you a drink?" And okay, she knows the rules. But it doesn't go as she expects. The conversation really takes this extraordinary turn when Jesus says to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. And she's like, huh? She's totally perplexed by this statement. It's like, first of all, a Jew's talking to me, a woman. Second of all, obviously I'm a Samaritan. But she says, she's trying to figure it out. She said, "You have nothing to draw the water with, and the well is very deep. How can you get living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob?" Now, by father, she doesn't mean like dad. She means her ancestor, the ancestor Jacob. Jacob as in the grandson of Abraham. That Jacob, the Abraham being the father of all the Abrahamic religions. That Jacob whose other name was Israel. That Jacob. She's saying, are you greater than Jacob? It's an extraordinary question for a woman to ask. They've talked to each other maybe for like 2 or 3 minutes. And Jesus says, everyone who drinks this water, the water from the well, will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I give them will never thirst. the water I give them becomes a spring of water which springs to eternal life. Now, this Samaritan woman has just met him, but she's going for it. And she says, she's very respectful. She said, "Sir, please give me the water so that I won't get thirsty and I won't have to keep coming down to this well to get water." And the story gets even more interesting now. So Jesus goes, "Okay, go and bring your husband and come back." And she says, "I have no husband." And Jesus already knows this because he's omniscient. And he says, but he's kind of testing her. He said, "You're right when you say you don't have a husband. You've already had five husbands, and the man that you're now with is not your husband. So you are speaking the truth." And of course, this woman is completely flabbergasted and said, "I see you're a prophet." And then it's like, okay, you're a prophet. And then they have this kind of short conversation about Judaic religious practices and Sumerian religious practices. And it kind of, for a few minutes, they have this philosophical conversation about what Jews do, what Samaritans do. And then Jesus tells her one of the most beautiful lines of the gospel, one that which Swamiji was very fond of repeating. And then he tells her, God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. And the Samaritan woman says, "I know that the Messiah called Christ is coming, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us." And Jesus then lets the truth out to the winds and says, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." It's like, whoa, he tells this to a Samaritan woman. So the disciples come back from town and they're like blown away because he's talking to a Samaritan woman. We see his extraordinary breadth of vision, his enormous heart, his courage, and his willingness to speak truth no matter what the consequences. He lets the truth speak for itself. So it's really very significant that Jesus chooses first a woman, second of all, a Samaritan, and third of all, a big time, what you would call sinner, because the fact that she's already had 5 men, now she's got a woman, she's got a man she's just living with. This is breaking Judaic law to such an extent, you're just ripe for stoning. He chooses to give the message to her. He lets the world know in this way that his message is for everybody. No holds barred. Absolutely no holds barred. Spiritual life is for everyone. Male, female, Jew, Samaritan, everybody. Sinner, non-sinner. It's for everybody. Now the Samaritan woman has 3 strikes against her, but she's honest, she's open-hearted, and she has tremendous faith. And she's humble. She's open-hearted with him. And so the Messiah comes to her because of her open-heartedness, her truthfulness, and her faith. And Sri Ramakrishna did the same thing with Girish Ghosh, and the other theater people. Like Girish was a well-known drunk. He was a well-known debauched actor and playwright. Everybody knew. Girish himself said, "There's no sin I have not committed, and if I knew that Thakur would save me, I would have done much more." But he was honest. He was completely honest, and he had 1,000% pure faith. Because with incarnations, faith goes a really long way. Not the stupid faith that says, "Okay, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid now. Whatever you say, I'm going to do." Yeah. No, not that kind of. The one, it's like, I see the truth. You're speaking the truth. I know that I don't know everything. I will follow you. Faith indicates a lessening of the ego. It means that a willingness to be taught, because faith in an open heart. Faith indicates an open heart, because if you know everything, then you can't be taught anything. And no humility equals no faith. If you have faith, real faith, you have the humility to say what Arjuna says in the Gita, Shishasteham shadimam tvam prapanam. I am your disciple. Teach me. I take refuge in you. That is real faith. Jesus, like Sri Ramakrishna, didn't care about whether people were following the letter of the law. He looked into their hearts. And he looked into the hearts of the people that he encountered, and then he gave them the truth. In the Gospel of Luke, we're told about the woman who had been bent over for 18 years, like bent over. And of course, the people said, you've done something evil, so that's why you're suffering this thing. And Jesus was at the synagogue, and he heals her on the Sabbath. And of course, the synagogue authorities are outraged. You've broken the Sabbath, And Jesus turns on them and said, you hypocrites. You have unloosed your oxen. You've unloosed your donkeys. You've brought them to water. I cannot heal this woman who's been bent over for 18 years. And then he calls her a daughter of Abraham. By doing so, he gives her the same respect as the guys in the synagogue. That's the kind of respect that he saw in every human being, that innate nobility, that innate divinity that every human being has. And there's another wonderful incident. This woman has suffered from hemorrhaging blood for 12 long years. Now, a menstruating woman is considered unclean, can't be around anybody, and anyone who touches her is unclean too. You are a defiled being. Now, she's been suffering for 12 years, and she's basically an outcast. So she comes into this, Jesus comes in, and there's this big crowd of people, and she comes in and she just touches his cloak because she has the faith that if she just touched his cloak, she would be healed. Jesus feels, it says, the power leaving his body. And he turns and says, who has touched me? And the disciples say, there's this crowd of people, you're never going to know who touched me. But he says, no, who touched me? And this woman comes forward crying, terrified, because she knows she's defiled him. She falls at his feet and weeps and said, it was I who have touched you. And Jesus says, he doesn't see her as this unclean, polluted woman. He sees her as kind of wounded humanity. And he said, your faith has healed you. And he calls her daughter. Daughter. It's like she's been like an outcast for 12 years. And he lovingly calls her the most tender word, daughter. That's what the Incarnation does for us. They're full of grace and truth. They uplift us. They show us the real meaning of love and compassion. It's like not, I love you, I love you. It's like, that's love. He's offending a whole bunch of people there. He doesn't care. He's showing us that this woman has divinity too. They show us our potential as human beings. And then there's the remarkable incident of the woman who had a bad name. Now, Jesus is invited to a Pharisee's house, and he is invited to break bread. So he's sitting down with the Pharisee, and this woman comes and she anoints his head with oil, and then she falls at his feet, and she weeps, and she, with her tears, his feet are wet, and then she dries them with her hair. And then she anoints his feet with perfumed oil. And the Pharisee thinks to himself, well, if this man were a prophet, he would know what a bad name this woman is, and he would not allow her to touch him. And Jesus turns on him, because of course he knows everything, and he says, you see this woman? I came into your house, and you didn't offer water to wash my feet. When I came in, you did not greet me with a kiss. But since I've come here, she has washed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair, and she has covered my feet with kisses. When I came in, you didn't anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with perfumed oil. For this reason, I tell you, her sins, which are many, must have been forgiven her. or else she would not have shown such great love. And then Jesus gives this clincher. He said, it's the person who is forgiven little who shows little love. It's like, whoa. In other words, Mr. Pharisee, you are a small-hearted, tight-hearted person. If you can't find it in your heart to open your heart, of course you can't forgive. That's why you can show such little love. That didn't go well with the Pharisee population because Jesus is expected to shun her. And instead he said, go in peace. Your sins are forgiven because of your faith. And this is that wonderful faith, not blind faith, but this wonderful faith that has this powerful love as its basis. And of course, we all know that celebrated incident of the woman who was supposed to be stoned to death for being caught in adultery. And Jesus is asked to come and said, and they've got this woman there. She's dragged before the men, and they say, Jewish law says that she must be stoned to death. What do you say? You know, they're testing him. They're poking him. And so, as you know, Jesus says, let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. And one by one, they just slink away. And then Jesus turns to her and says, where are your accusers? She says, they've all gone. He said, neither do I accuse thee. Go your way and sin no more. He doesn't see where other people see sin, other people see pollution, other people seeing deformity. He sees the beauty of humanity and that nobility that comes with having that divinity within our hearts. That's what he sees. And that's what he asks us to see when we see other people. And we see how powerful these events occurred 2,000 years ago. But how important and how moving they are now. Because they show the effect of the Incarnation. And when it comes down to earth, what profound changes that they can do for us as human beings, how they can turn our hearts into something greater and more noble than they are now. And we see this great breadth of vision and this kind of expansion of heart in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. About 1,800 years later in a very, very different culture. Now, just as we didn't know the cultural traditions of Jesus' time, we also don't really understand those of Sri Ramakrishna, because we often think, oh, wasn't that long ago? They were just like us, but they didn't drive. No, it was a very, very different world, very different standards of behavior, and very different ideals, very different mores in society. Now, what we often forget was that Sri Ramakrishna lived at a time when the rule of Purda was very strong. By Purda, I mean that men and women were kept very separately. Women were kept in a different room altogether. They were always behind a screen, or they lived in what they called the inner apartments. Men and women did not mix unless you were a direct relative of a woman. You just didn't see her. That was part of the Purda custom. Now, of course, in some of these places it got a little looser in the more urban areas, but at the time of Ramakrishna, really not all that much. So, since men and women did not mix, imagine Sri Ramakrishna's first guru being a woman. This was extremely rare. Spiritual teachers were men, and men would have men spiritual teachers. Spiritual teachers were not women. So you can imagine how surprising it was that Ramakrishna's first guru was a woman. He didn't care. He knew that she was meant to teach him important parts in his spiritual life. So he just went with it. This is my teacher. Even more astonishing, on the night of the springtime Kali Puja, the Phalahani Kali Puja, instead of worshiping the image of the goddess Kali, Sri Ramakrishna brought his young wife Sarda, set her on the dais, and worshipped her. And at the end of this very long puja, He prostrated before her and offered her all the results of his life's many, many austerities, offered them to her at her feet, kind of making her the heir to all of his spiritual life. That was really astonishing. Sri Ramakrishna's attitude towards women is completely liberating because it's entirely built on the knowledge of the innate divinity of women. Sri Ramakrishna literally saw all women as manifestations of the Divine Mother. And throughout the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he never tires of saying, all women are manifestations of the Divine Mother. Again and again, we hear these words being spoken. He also said, I see no difference between a chaste woman and a prostitute. And this he literally put into practice when he went backstage at Calcutta's Star Theatre. This was the theater that was Girish Chandra Ghosh's theater. Because actresses at that time were really looked down upon. Now it's like an actress, oh, she's an actress, she's famous, and we kind of love the celebrity of a famous actress. Not then. Actresses were really looked down upon. And they were seen as prostitutes because, you know what? They were pretty much drawn from Calcutta's prostitute quarters. A woman, a good woman, a normal woman, a woman with a family would no way be able to be an actress, because there's no way that if you're observing Purdah, you're going to go out on stage. That will never shall happen. This is why a lot of times men took female roles, because a good woman, a normal woman, could never be out in public. This was just unheard of. Theaters were seen as dens of iniquity, and often they were. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of opium going on. And women who associated with it were completely denigrated. Swami Vivekananda himself said, when I was young, I was such a Puritan that I did not walk on the same side of the sidewalk where there was a theater. That's all kind of Puritan, but he was pretty much in keeping with all the other people, all the good people of that time. So for a respectable person to attend the theater was shocking enough. That was shocking. But for a spiritual teacher to do so and to go backstage and to bless the actresses and have one of the most well-known playwrights who was well known to be an alcoholic and all the other people in the theater, for him to go backstage and bless them, that was absolutely shocking and unthinkable. In fact, a lot of his followers stopped coming to see him because they were so shocked and they wanted to register their disapproval. A lot of the Brahmo Samaj people who used to come stopped coming because he was associating with the wrong kind of people. It was the wrong message to give. The famous actress Binodini, who was considered the greatest actress of her time, said that when Sri Ramakrishna came backstage, she knelt at his feet and he put his hands on her head and blessed her. She said he cleansed my sinful body. And she said he blessed her and said, Mother, may you have Chaitanya. So beautiful. Not long before Sri Ramakrishna's death, Binodini disguised herself as a boy so she could get in to see him. She put her long hair up in a cap and hid it, and then, she's an actress, right? So she portrayed herself as a young boy and then kind of slipped in to see him because Sri Ramakrishna was gravely ill. And the disciples were kind of zealous in protecting him from visitors who shouldn't be there, didn't want his energy being drained. So she slips into his room, he sees her, she pulls off her cap, and her long tresses come pouring down, and he has a good laugh. And he treated her with great affection and love, despite the fact he was so close to death. This is how he treated women. The Indian historian, the very famous historian Sumit Sarkar, says, Ramakrishna's unexpected blessing of theater women gave a new respectability to a profession that was despised by many. And he became kind of a patron saint of the Calcutta Public Theatre. And this is why in all the green rooms in Calcutta, you see a framed picture of Sri Ramakrishna in those rooms. because it's like, he's our guy. He came to help us. He's ours. He understands us. So if we try to compare Sri Ramakrishna and Jesus, we come up with sort of a slightly different equation, because Jesus had close women disciples, and he really broke publicly social barriers to include them, to heal them, and to really prioritize them. But you don't see that sort of in kind of often public closeness with women, because at the time of Jesus, there was no tradition in the Jewish world of renunciation. There is no tradition of monks or nuns, no tradition of sannyasa, kind of giving up, breaking all family ties. In Jewish world, very strong in family ties. India has the sannyasa tradition of breaking all ties and observing sannyasa. So their ways of relating to women necessarily had to be different, because although Sri Ramakrishna was married to Sri Sarada Devi, he was also at the same time a sadhu. He was a sannyasin. He had taken sannyasa vows. Not only that, but he was also a spiritual teacher who was guiding the lives of the first generation of the monks of the Ramakrishna order. So he had to show them by his words, but even more by his example. He had to show by his words and by his living example how a monk, how a spiritual teacher should live in the world. And so for this reason, we have in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna these warnings again and again about the dangers of woman in gold, kamani kanchana, woman in gold. And if you're a woman and you hear this, you kind of get this tick after a while. It's like, woman in gold. And it makes you feel kind of bad. I mean, we've had women come into the bookstore, pick up the book and say, how can you read this? It's so sexist. But actually it's not. And the problem is, if we try to understand Ramakrishna by just reading the gospel, not reading the words of the women, then we won't understand what profound love and regard and tenderness he really had towards women. Now, it also needs to be said that M, the translator, M, who was the recorder of the gospel, when he himself wrote an English translation of the gospel, the Katamrata, the original, is in 5 volumes. He translated the first part of the first volume, and he put it into very biblical English, but he always said lust and greed, never woman in gold. He never translated Kamani Kanchana literally as woman in gold, nor did Swami Vivekananda when he came to this country. He repeatedly said lust and greed. Why? Because that was the intent of Sri Ramakrishna, not to kind of stigmatize women, but to say the problem of lust and period. Furthermore, when Ramakrishna talks about lust, woman in gold, he's not talking about women out there. He's talking about the woman in here that the men are encountering. This is the problem. It's not the problem out there. The problem is when the women out there elicit something in the woman in here, then the problem begins. If you have a pure heart and a pure mind, there's no problem. So if we read just the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, trying to understand his relationship with women, people often come away with the impression that he's a misogynist, but he's not. He's not. Nor do I want to denigrate in any way the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, which is like of paramount importance in understanding Sri Ramakrishna. These are like living words. They're filled with such love and tenderness and power. Moreover, Sarada Devi herself said when the first words the gospel recorded and brought to her to read out loud, she said, I feel as if Thakur himself, Sri Ramakrishna himself, is standing before me speaking. That's how accurate those words are. But it's less helpful to understand how she was with women just because the laws of Purta were in effect. When Sri Ramakrishna is talking to M and the other men in the gospel, first of all, M only comes on Sundays and holidays. He doesn't come at any other times. He's a school teacher. He's busy. So when M is there, he's talking to a big room full of men, and the women are either behind a screen or in a different room altogether. They're not there. So we rarely see Ramakrishna having direct contact with the women because they're not in the room. They're not there. And when Ramakrishna goes to visit women, M isn't there because Ramakrishna is invited in, but M is not. So M isn't there to record the words. Moreover, the women themselves were largely illiterate. They're not recording these things. How can they? They can't read or write. So if we were to just read the gospel, we wouldn't know that when Sri Ramakrishna spoke to women, he talked about the dangers of Purusha Kanchana, man and gold. When he spoke to women, he talked about the dangers of women getting involved in Purusha Kanchana, man and gold. His female disciple Gaurima said that Ramakrishna warned against the dangers of lust and greed. She's saying here, but surely not against women. Just as he advised the ascetic-minded men to guard themselves against women's charms, so did he caution pious women against men's company. She said he had not the slightest contempt or aversion to women. Rather, he had an intense sympathy and profound regard for him. And she was a very close disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. So, even aside from that fact, we have to remember that for a sannyasin, a monk, a sadhu, a monk or a nun, the renunciation has to show in these words and deeds. And their conduct has to be beyond reproach. Sri Ramakrishna was once said, okay, how do you know who's a sadhu? And Sri Ramakrishna answered the person. He said, a sadhu is one who, among other things, never forgets to look upon woman as his mother. And if he's near her, he offers her his worship, his puja, if he is near her. Now, that is some profound respect indeed. It's like offering woman worship knowing that she is a literal manifestation of the Divine Mother. Sri Ramakrishna's disciple Yoganma said, everyone now says he did not allow women to touch him or even go near him. We laugh to hear it and think, oh, we're not dead yet. Who will know how kind he was? He had the same attitude toward men and women. He had the same attitude toward men and women. But it is true, she said, that if women stayed near him too long, he would say, please now go to the temple. She said he also asked men to do the same thing. Yoganma was not only Sri Ramakrishna's disciples, but she was also with Golapma, Sarada Devi's lifelong companion. She and Golapma were lifelong companions of Sarada Devi. And once Yoganma was asked, please tell us how compassionate Holy Mother Sarada Devi was, because she was so famous for her compassion. And Yogan responded, Mother Sarada Devi certainly loves us all very much, but her love doesn't have the intensity of Thakur's, which was kind of surprising to hear. What concern and love he had towards his disciples. We see it with our own eyes. Words cannot describe it. So when we listen to the women who knew Ramakrishna, we find that to a person, they say how loving, how kind, and how really respectful he was towards them and to other women. Yoganma said that when women talked to Ramakrishna, they spoke to him in really about very intimate matters very, very freely. She said, and how kind, how affectionate the master was. When strangers casually reading the life of Ramakrishna sometimes jumped to the conclusion that he didn't like women, we simply laugh. Sarada Devi, Holy Mother, often spoke of that intense joy she felt in Sri Ramakrishna's presence. She said, I felt as if a jar of bliss was overflowing in my heart at all times. She often spoke of the respect and the care that he gave her. And he not only literally worshipped her, but he also cared for her in really very earthly ways as well. He not only took care of her in his own lifetime, but he made sure that after his death that she would be well provided for. And even though he was also quite concerned about her, he came to her and he said, you need more exercise. He felt like she wasn't getting enough air, not enough exercise in that tiny little Nahabat in which she lived. He said, a caged bird doesn't do very well. You need to go out and get more exercise. He was very concerned about her health. And even though he was famously adverse to money, he made sure that she was going to be provided for. And what's really astonishing is that he had some very costly ornaments made for her, because these very costly bracelets that he had personally made for her, and he wanted them made like the one Sita had, the one he had in a vision of Sita. He wanted them made like that. And even though they were very costly, he wanted them made for her because she liked her ornaments. It's really very sweet. Holy Mother liked her ornaments, and so Sri Ramakrishna had them made for her. Now, this seems kind of lightweight for an avatar. Let's remember that at a time when spiritual teachers were men and women were behind the screen or in the inner apartments or another place altogether, Sri Ramakrishna insisted that Sarada Devi continue his work after his death. Before his death, Ramakrishna complained to her and said, "Well, my dear, won't you do anything? Should this," pointing to his own body, "do everything single-handedly?" And Holy Mother retorted, "Well, what can I do? I'm a woman." And Sri Ramakrishna said, no, you will have to do a lot. And she just like, no. And so Sri Ramakrishna waited a few days, then he brought it up again. And he said, "See, the people in Calcutta appear to be crawling like worms in the dark. You must take care of them. Look after them." And she protested again. She said, "What can I do? I'm just a woman." And she said, "It's not possible. I'm a woman." And he said, pointing to himself, "What, after all, has this one done? You have to do much more." And that's exactly what happened. Sri Ramakrishna taught Holy Mother all the mantras that she would use for her initiations. And it wasn't just the mantras he taught her. She said with his own hands, with those on, he drew for me the picture of the Kundalini and all the chakras with his own hand. He drew that for me. And Holy Mother wasn't the only woman he had to kind of push into teaching. His disciple Gauri Ma was another. He had given Gauri Ma the Garawa cloth of sannyasi. He'd given her the cloth of renunciation, making her the first real nun of the Ramakrishna order. And Ramakrishna expressed real sorrow to her that the women of India, and of Bengal in particular, and Calcutta, were suffering so much. He said, "Look, these women are greatly suffering. They are drowned to the neck in the darkness of ignorance. You must take up the burden of educating them." And she refused. She said, no way. She said, no, I'm going to take a few girls and we'll go up to the mountains and I will train them individually. And he said, Ramakrishna said, no, nothing doing. No going to the mountains. You've done enough tapasya. You've done enough austerity. You set yourself to work for the sake of the women of this country. I mean, we think about Ramakrishna just kind of sitting on a lotus, just absorbed in samadhi, not caring about anything. Look how much he cared. Look how much he wanted to remove women from the darkness they were enveloped in. And Gauri Ma did it. She started the Saradeshwari Ashrama, a monastic organization for women in Kolkata that still has a school, is still very much in existence. Sister Devamata, who is an American woman, came to India right after Sri Ramakrishna died, and she was there with all the disciples and all the women disciples, Sri Ramakrishna as well. She mixed easily with both sides. And she said that when Ramakrishna visited women, they were occasions of great rejoicing. She said sometimes 50 or 60 women would all congregate and listen to Sri Ramakrishna, and he would talk to them in a simple, sweet way for several hours. And the historian Sumit Sarkar verifies this. He said, Sri Ramakrishna won the devotion of many women. We have many accounts of women casting out their inhibitions and casting off purdah to go to Dakshineshwar in the spirit of almost joyous abandon. This is pretty unthinkable for respectable women to just skip out on purdah and just go off to Dakshineshwar in a spirit of joyous abandon to be with Sri Ramakrishna. Now, why would they do that? For the same reason the gopis did it with Krishna when he played the flute. Because that they felt that pull of love. They felt that immense love that was just pulling them in, pulling them in. In fact, when Gauri Ma first went to Sri Ramakrishna, she came, she said, I felt this ton, I felt this incredible pull. When Sri Ramakrishna, when she got there, he was at the ghat waiting for her, and he had a piece of string, and he was reeling it in, just reeling it in, the way you reel in a fish. That's how she started out. They feel that love, that compassion, that kindness. And we can feel it too. We are so fortunate to be so close to the time of the Avatar. We are so fortunate. It's within a couple hundred years, 150 years. We know people who were with Holy Mother. We know people who can tell us stories that they heard from their gurus about what Sri Ramakrishna said to them. We are so fortunate. We're fortunate we have this opportunity. And we are fortunate to be able to remember that this holy time, that as Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. All we have to do is make use of this blessed opportunity that we have as human beings to spend the time to go within and to realize that immense truth that the Avatar has come for us. They come down to earth for our sake so that we can attain that kingdom of God that is within us. Thank you. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamataya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. And Merry Christmas, everybody. If anyone has any questions, any complaints, any comments, I'm happy to get out of the way. Okay, y'all doing all right Christmas time? Have a holly jolly Christmas? Ding dong merrily on high. In heaven the bells are ringing. I think Christmas Eve, are we going to do that?
Yeah.
On Christmas Eve, we'll have our usual 6 o'clock Vespers, and then we're going to follow it by recording of what we had with our sing-along Christmas carols, and a reading of the Gospels, the Nativity Gospels. It isn't live because we can't do that now. It is a recording, and you can hear all the people who were here, and maybe some of you were here to listen to it in person. But this way, at least you can sing along and you can listen to the words in the Nativity Gospel. We're going to try to pull that off on Christmas Eve, beginning at 6 o'clock at night with our arati. So any other questions? Anything? Okay. Then all of us join in wishing you a very, very, very Merry Christmas and a blessed, happy, safe, joyful 2021. May it be immensely better than 2020.